Earlier this year, we wrote about Raystown Lake, and I think I said something about how surprised I was by the number of man-made lakes there are in Pennsylvania. But not really the number, I suppose, just how large some of them are, and Raystown, of course, being the largest. But nearby Bond and I, there's another lake, and we have touched near upon its shores in other episodes, notably the episode where I talked about my own experiences in the supposedly haunted Snyder Cemetery, which is in Moraine State Park, and the most prominent feature of Moraine State Park is its lake, Lake Arthur. I have an early memory of the lake, though I'd been there when I was a kid. Our friends' parents would drive us there during the summer. I remember there was a sandy beach, which is still there, but when I was a kid, I remember it having a lot more sand and being real busy in the summer, and also the distinct smell of swimming in a lake. Now, I, as a child, having known the salty smell of the Gulf of Mexico, I will forever associate lake swimming with this smell. Not necessarily unpleasant, but not a good smell, I suppose. That's all irrelevant. I also, more importantly, remember my 4th grade teacher mentioning how the lake wasn't always there and that a highway actually ran underneath its waters. For whatever reason, I never forgot that little chestnut, and just a couple years ago, while on a pontoon boat tour looking for bald eagles, and we did see a couple, the staff or piloting the boat drove over the remains of an old strip of Route 422, though it wasn't visible at the time. And this is getting a little ahead. Yes, Lake Arthur in Moraine State Park is man-made, and fairly recent as these things go. When we spoke about Raystown, we mentioned that the lake had its origins going as far back as 1905. Pymatuning in Crawford County, just north of Moraine, got underway around 1931, and the Allegheny Reservoir in Warren County, which we have discussed in episode 23, started in the early 1960s. Lake Arthur, which most folks I know in the area simply refer to as Moraine State Park, or the lake at Moraine State Park, was actually not filled until 1970. The prehistoric period of the area reveals that several glaciers were slowly pulled south toward the equator, stopping just north of the present Moraine State Park. Moraine actually being the geological term that defines the leftover rubble and debris that a glacier leaves behind. These glaciers also left several large lakes following their melting. Glaciers and their lakes that forever changed the soil of our region here in Butler County, in northern Butler County in particular. These glaciers also carved the land, affecting the topography and damming several northern flowing creeks and rivers in the area in those days. Geology of the area provides us evidence of 3 glacier lakes that would eventually erode and in that way create the Slippery Rock Gorge just west of Moraine State Park at McConnells Mill State Park in neighboring Lawrence County. This also resulted in the present day's creek's reversal, as the remaining Slippery Rock and Muddy Creek now flow in a southern direction. While we're on the subject of the Slippery Rock, I honestly feel that it's more of a river than a creek. This is especially true if you spot it near McConnell's Mill. If the Rio Grande is a river, why not the Slippery Rock? I guess it's about comparable properties, real estate, but honestly, I have seen the Rio Grande and I was less than awed. Meanwhile, the Slippery Rock in that region by McConnell's Mill in particular has this wonderful glass bottle green color, and it sounds like it's out of a fairy tale description or something, and I'm sorry for all that. No more of that. But anyhow, let's talk about the area that was then known as Muddy Creek Valley. So the soil being what it was there wasn't particularly good for farming, and there is not much evidence that the American Indian tribes who lived through the region throughout pre-European influence utilized the land for farming. It was utilized for hunting, and several Indian roads passed through the lands. There were European establishments in the area by the mid-18th century, most notably Davis Hollow Cabin. This cabin, which stands just north of the Davis Hollow Marina in the Moraine State Park, was built around 1780 and has been restored and is open to overnight staying. Though attempts were made, European settlers in the area did not have much luck with farming the area. More extensive populations in the immediate area would not begin until after the American Revolution, with both Butler and Newcastle, the county seats of Butler and Lawrence County respectively, with which Moraine State Park sits between, while Butler and Newcastle were both settled right around 1800. The region, which would become the state park and the lake within, would be mined extensively, first for clay, then for coal, and by the late 1800s, natural gas and oil. A small town called Isle existed in the area of Route 528, but much of the land was unoccupied. And while I'd known of this town for a while, my reading in preparation for this tells me that that town was around as early as 1844, and quite possibly a little bit older. And to the best that I know, that's most of what was all going on from the time of, again, European settlement of the region, and well in through the next few decades. The area continued to be mined heavily, was fairly sparsely populated, and with a bit of railroad running through it, but that railroad would actually be abandoned before World War II took place. So this is where we get to Frank Preston. Born in Leicester, England in 1896, Preston is a truly interesting character. He's a polymath who had worked as a civil engineer while still living in the United Kingdom. He would immigrate to Meridian, immediately outside of Butler, Pennsylvania, the same county in which Moraine State Park sits. There, in Meridian, in 1927, he would establish Preston Laboratories, a glass research facility, which has many ties to the Corning Company. This company still exists in Meridian today as American Glass Research, or AGR. Preston Park, the site of Frank Preston's home, is a wooded area not far from AGR. But like I had said earlier, Preston was a true polymath and had deep interest in ornithology, geology, botany, and more, and published several books on the rarity and distribution of plant species. He also published articles in Ecology, a peer-reviewed scientific journal. While exploring the area that is the Muddy Creek Valley, Preston surveyed the land with his geological eyes and realized the impact the glaciers had had on the region. Of course, this is the Cliff Notes version of the story, but these observations led Preston and like-minded colleagues to work towards restoring the lands. Much work was to be done, including the capping off of more than 400 oil and gas wells. There were also mines that were sealed and regraded. By 1932, Preston would be a founding member of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, which still exists as a private nonprofit. The group operates in 20 Western Pennsylvania counties and is involved in the community forestry and cleaning of thousands of miles of Pennsylvania waterways. In fact, if you've ever been to Falling Water, the Frank Lloyd Wright House, that is actually maintained by the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and has been so, to the best of my understanding, since 1963. The Western Pennsylvania Conservancy would purchase the land that is now Moraine State Park. This included purchasing a number of private homes, including those in the previously mentioned village of Isle. It even meant purchasing a small amusement park. By the mid-1960s, the real work would begin and culminate in the damming of Muddy Creek. The dam would be built in the last years of the 1960s and would be completed in May of 1969, though it would take 11 months for the small creeks, principally Muddy Creek, to fill the lake itself. Now, the lake has a volume of 37,000 acre-feet, which acre feet is a unit of measurement completely unknown to me. So I looked up how to convert that to US gallons, and my conversion is something in the neighborhood of 12 billion gallons, which admittedly is an equally impossible number for me to compute were I not intimately familiar with the size of the lake itself. Though there is a chance I used the wrong conversion formula too. Anyhow, 11 months later, in 1970, the lake was filled and the park would be dedicated. By 1973, or rather in 1973, it would host the Boy Scout National Jamboree. It would again host the Jamboree in 1977, and actually, an uncle of mine, now deceased, actually attended that first Jamboree. Earlier now, I'd mentioned that part of old Route 422 runs under the lake, and this is true and somewhat odd, as if the DNRC website is to be believed, it was 422 gas wells, which were capped during the restoration of the land, which I had mentioned before. And there are also ghost ramps, long abandoned on-off ramps, which were constructed in preparation for those Boy Scout jamborees and abandoned by 1980. These connect the park to Route 79. One of the oldest photos we posted on our Facebook page, which I realize we really need to update, and on Instagram, is of the ghost ramps at Moraine State Park. And thanks go to our friend Chris D for those pictures. Frank Preston would pass on in 1989 at the age of 92. His wife Jane would be involved in many naturalistic things in Butler County and was an early advocate of organic gardening, and she was very involved in the community, very involved in health and gardening, and there must be something to it because obviously Frank lived until the age of 92, and Jane would pass away in 2008 at the age of 96, and the Preston name is still highly regarded in the region. There are numerous locations in Moraine State Park which are worth mentioning. Not only the lake, Mount Zion Church, one of the only remaining structures from the town of Isle. The congregation first formed in 1819 and they baptized people in Muddy Creek. In fact, I mentioned clay being mined in Muddy Creek, and it is my understanding that the foundation of Mount Zion Church is made from clay that comes from right there on the site of the church itself. Beside the church is a bridge which has possibly been seen by tens of thousands of people who have never set foot anywhere near the park, as it was featured in a Kevin Smith movie, the movie Dogma. Now, if you're familiar with the film, you may recall when a naked Chris Rock fell from the sky, landing on a bridge, and yes, that is the Route 528 bridge in Moraine State Park. Now, I've spoken about my personal experiences at Snyder Cemetery, which is an old family plot not far from the lake shore, but there are even more strange stories than those, and not just those focused on the Snyder Cemetery beyond my own, but I'm going to leave those for Bond to cover later on. These days, Moraine State Park is popular for hiking, hunting, ice fishing, swimming, and boating, especially boating. And Bond and I have been known to fly fish Muddy Creek beyond the dam and the lake itself. It's not too deep, and there are areas where you can wade out absurdly far into the water before it gets much beyond your knees, and you can throw poppers for bass or whatever. But me, I prefer the dry flying and nymphing along Muddy Creek, though there the water is clear enough that you can see musky fish and they stalk in the water. And I'll bounce stuff off their noses all day, and after all these years, I still haven't gotten one of them to bite.
Hey everyone, it's Bond here from Dr. Pennsylvania. He's not joking about the muskie and pike in Muddy Creek. They're terrifying. I wouldn't even know what to do if I actually even caught one. But I wanted to add my 2 cents here at the end of this episode, just covering some of the weirder stuff about Moraine. Whenever you talk to people about anything spooky related to Moraine State Park, the first thing that's going to come up, as we've talked about before, is Snyder Cemetery. It's something that most people know about in the area. It's a pretty common urban legend or just haunted location, as you will. Whenever you talk to people about it, though, you always hear the same stories. You hear that red eyes will chase you out. You hear about a green glowing light coming from one of the gravestones. You hear about white flashes of light, weird fog, stuff along those lines. Now, some of those things might be apocryphal, just because like those are the things that are associated with old creepy graveyards. But given where it's at in relation to the water and everything, fog around there wouldn't be that unusual. And there are lots of different reports around Western PA in general of kind of weird lights in the woods, which could be geological in nature or it could just be misidentification, who knows. But as someone who's been there on multiple occasions, I can agree that it is a really creepy place, but I'm not sure how much of that has to do with the place actually being spooky versus just like you bring your own presumptions to the location, which I think is an important distinction to make because it is a cemetery that, is a family plot. And you hear these stories about maybe some of the deaths around some of the Snyder family. And again, it's really hard to, at least from my research, to distinguish what is folklore and what is history and where those two meet. One of the things in general with Moraine that I found whenever I was searching for Snyder Cemetery that I didn't know was that there are actually 6 graveyards on the park proper. Some of them are underwater and some of them are above water. But I thought that was kind of weird that there's definitely some that are in the woods that are not marked, because I can only think of 3. So I'm going to do a little more research on that, and if we can find some other ones that are back in the woods, we might have to do a little field trip for that. Now, whenever people talk about Moraine State Park, as we've stated earlier, McConnells Mill always comes up as well. Now, I would generally think that most people think that McConnells Mills is more haunted than Moraine if we had like a meter. Part of that is because there are quite a few, while there are deaths that have occurred obviously at both parks, it seems to happen more often. There's more accidental deaths at McConnells Mills, sometimes even with rescue workers dying, which is tragic. And a lot of these stories of people dying there are really heartbreaking. But that obviously adds to the ambiance of the location, because it is dangerous. Whereas, lots of outdoor places are dangerous. Some just look more dangerous than others. McConnells Mills happens to both look dangerous and be dangerous. But along with those vibes, there are some stories. One of the ones I came across was the bridge. Now, again, this story may be apocryphal in the sense that every covered bridge in every creepy backwater seems to have this story. But just to repeat it again and add to the legacy, basically the story is that there is a girl who died in a auto accident at the covered bridge going over Slippery Rock Creek in McConnells Mills. And the story says that she can be summoned by parking your car in the middle of the bridge, turning off the engine, turning all the lights off, honking your horn 3 times, and she's supposed to appear in your rearview mirror. Natural reaction would be to turn around and look, but she disappears before you can see her full form. I really do think that every place has one of these stories, but it's fun. I know a lot of people that have tried it. I don't think I ever did it myself. It's a pretty common thrill-seeking thing for folks to do around here. Apparently, there was also a story of a mill worker back when the mill was still operational, who apparently died in an accident in the mill house. And people say that you can see him carrying his lantern up and down the main road at night. There's also a story of a caretaker who lived on the property from the 30s into the 60s, who apparently you can see his lantern as well at night, but apparently he chases people out due to his love for the area. He doesn't want people messing with anything, or maybe going to that bridge and honking your horn 3 times and just being generally disruptive. But yes, I mean, it's kind of the standard stuff you see a lot of places, but it's a gorge. Both parks are absolutely gorgeous. And because there's a lot of water, there's a lot of rocks. Unfortunately, there's a lot of deaths tied to both these locations. And that's really sad, but it definitely does. It's something you do think about whenever you go to these locations. As far as other weird stuff, I did come across 2 possible Bigfoot sightings in the BFRO accounts. The first one was really old. It's from 1977. It's from a woman who was driving through the park, and what the observer says is that at approximately midnight, I was traveling home from my parents. I got about 3 or 4 tenths of a mile going slowly up a steep grade. There's lots of steep grades in this area. I saw something out of the corner of my eye, assuming it was a deer about to cross the road in front of me. I stopped. Well, it wasn't a deer. When I first looked at it, I thought maybe it was a bear walking upright. But when it, in quotes, got directly in front of my headlights, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was not, in capital letters, not a bear. It walked ever so slowly across the road like the car wasn't even there. It did not even look in my direction. I was so scared. My little girl was sleeping in the back seat. I thought I should just step on the gas and try to hit it. All kinds of ideas were racing through my head, but I decided not to try and run it over because I thought if I just hurt it or make it mad, it might hurt me and my daughter. I'm sure it was probably only a minute, but it seemed like a lifetime until it crossed the road and was gone. It made no sound. It resembled very much the pictures at this site. She's referring to the BFRO. I have never spoken about this publicly, and I have not told very close relatives. I had nightmares for years after. A few years later, my mother and daughter were walking through an old strip mine just a short distance from where it had crossed the road years before. There were fresh footprints in the mud. I believe my brother made a plaster cast of the print. We don't speak any longer, so I'm not sure if he still has it. I originally saw the thing in 1977. My mom saw the prints about 5 years later, so obviously it was still in the area. So obviously that sighting has a lot of Bigfoot tropes going on. But again, folks in this area are used to seeing bears and deer, so if you have someone who says it wasn't a deer and it was not a bear, I'm generally inclined to believe them. Then we have another newer story that I came across, also from the BFRO. So the investigator named Tom spoke to this gentleman who said, I spoke with the witness over the phone and gathered a strong sense that the experience, though not visual in nature, was life-changing for him. It was mid-morning on a beautiful spring day in Moraine State Park. While sitting in his boat about 30-40 yards from the shoreline, the witness heard what sounded like 2 distinct wood knocks coming from an unpopulated forest back on shore. Shortly after the wood knocks, 3 clacks could be heard about 300 yards west of his location. This back-and-forth exchange happened for about 10 minutes in a consistent and repetitive nature. There were only a couple other boats on the water at the time. The witness was alone, and the experience caused the hair in the back of his neck to stand up. He said, I didn't necessarily feel like I was being watched, but I felt like I didn't belong there either. The witness has returned to the location since this incident and has noted that the area is more heavily overgrown with brush since then, denoting that little human activity is occurring in the particular location. The witness said, I do believe in Bigfoot, I always have. However, this is the first time anything like this has happened to me. It disturbed me so much that I started up my boat and moved to another part of the lake. Again, wood knocks and rock clacks could be a lot of things, but, the guy had an experience that, rattled him. And that I certainly believe. So, I was honestly surprised I didn't find more either ghost or cryptid accounts for Moraine. Again, because of, I guess, just how new it is, that has something to do with it. However, the stories we do have, I think, are, at least interesting. We have a few other lakes or reservoirs, or just bodies of water in general, we plan on doing some research on. One I am in contact with a ranger about, actually. So we'll hopefully get some real professional information on the one I'm working on right now. So, but either way, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Remember to leave us reviews on whatever podcatcher you're on. Tell your friends about us. And if you have any questions, let us know. So thanks. Have a good one. Take care.